The thunder of hooves against the dusty trail was the only sound that accompanied Yates Hamilton as he rode into Abilene, Kansas, on that sweltering summer day in 1872. His right hand, wrapped in a blood-stained bandage and throbbing with each beat of his heart, was tucked against his chest as he guided his chestnut mare with his left. The pain was a constant reminder of the price he'd paid for his freedom, and the reason he'd come to this cattle town looking for a fresh start. Abilene bustled with activity as cattle drives from Texas brought cowboys, cattle, and chaos to the once quiet Kansas town. The main street was lined with saloons, general stores, and establishments that catered to men who spent months on the trail with little more than dust and cattle for company. The air smelled of livestock, whiskey, and desperation, a combination Yates had grown accustomed to over the years. He guided his horse toward the livery stable, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings with the wariness of a man who'd learned the hard way that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. The broken bones in his hand might heal in time, but the wariness that had settled in his soul would likely remain forever. "Need some help there, mister?" The stable boy approached, eyeing the bandaged hand with curiosity. "Just need a stall for my horse and directions to the doctor," Yates replied, his voice roughened by trail dust and fatigue. He dismounted awkwardly, grimacing as the movement jarred his injured hand. "Doc Marshall's office is just down the street, past the general store. Can't miss it." The boy took the reins as Yates fished in his pocket for payment. With a nod of thanks, Yates set off down the street, his spurs jingling with each tired step. His tall frame cast a long shadow in the late afternoon sun, his dark hair curling beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. At 32, the lines around his eyes spoke of hard years spent under the unforgiving western sun, and the slight limp in his gait told of an old injury that still troubled him in cold weather. The doctor's office was a modest building with a weathered sign hanging above the door. As Yates approached, the door swung open and a woman stepped out, nearly colliding with him. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though several tendrils had escaped to frame a face that momentarily stole Yates's breath. "Excuse me," she said, steadying herself by placing a hand on his chest. Her touch, though brief, sent an unexpected warmth through him. "No harm done, madam," he replied, tipping his hat with his good hand. Her eyes, the color of summer sage, darted to his bandaged hand, and her expression shifted from surprise to professional assessment. "That looks like it needs attention. Are you here to see Doc Marshall?" Yates nodded. "If he's in." "He's not, I'm afraid. He was called to a farm outside town, difficult berth." She hesitated, then continued, "I'm Madeline Everett. I assist the doctor. I could take a look at your hand if you'd like." Yates studied her face, searching for any sign that she wasn't what she claimed. Finding none, he nodded. "Much obliged, Miss Everett. Name's Yates Hamilton." She gestured for him to enter the office. "Please come in, Mr. Hamilton." The doctor's office was neat and smelled of carbolic soap and herbs. Madeline directed him to a chair beside a table covered with various medical instruments. "What happened to your hand?" she asked as she carefully unwrapped the soiled bandage. Yates winced as the fabric pulled at the raw flesh. "Disagreement with a man who didn't appreciate losing at cards." "It appears he took his disappointment out on more than your winnings," she remarked, examining the injury with gentle fingers. "You have at least 2 broken bones, Mr. Hamilton, and these cuts need proper cleaning to prevent infection." "Do what you need to, Miss Everett." Madeline worked efficiently, cleaning the wounds with a solution that stung like fire. Yates gritted his teeth but made no sound. She glanced up at him, a hint of admiration in her eyes at his stoicism. "You'll need to keep this hand immobile for at least 6 weeks," she said as she began to splint the broken bones. "No riding, no roping, certainly no card games." "That's going to be a problem, madam. Riding and roping's how I make my living." She tied off the bandage with a neat knot. "Then I suggest you find alternative employment for the time being, unless you want to risk permanent damage." Her tone was professional, but tinged with genuine concern. Yates flexed his fingers experimentally and immediately regretted it as pain shot up his arm. Not many jobs for a one-handed cowboy in a cattle town. Madeline placed her medical supplies back in their proper places. "You'd be surprised, Mr. Hamilton. Abilene is growing. There are opportunities for those willing to look." She paused, considering something. "My brother owns the mercantile across the street. He's been looking for help. It's not exciting work, but it would give your hand time to heal." Yates raised an eyebrow. "You offering me a job, Miss Everett?" "Merely a suggestion," she replied with a slight smile. "Consider it professional advice." As she finished securing the bandage, her fingers lingered for a moment longer than necessary on his wrist. "Let me be the one to hold the other," she said softly, taking his uninjured left hand in both of hers. The gesture, simple yet intimate, caught him off guard. "Pardon?" Yates asked, uncertain if he'd heard her correctly. Madeline's cheeks colored slightly. "I mean, while your right hand heals, you'll need assistance. The community here in Abilene looks after its own, Mr. Hamilton, even newcomers." Something in her gaze made Yates wonder if there was more to her offer than mere neighborly kindness, but he dismissed the thought. Women like Madeline Everett, educated, refined, respectable, didn't look twice at drifters like him. "I appreciate the kindness, Miss Everett, but I don't make a habit of staying in one place too long." "And where exactly are you headed, Mr. Hamilton, with a broken hand and no means to work your trade?" She raised a challenging eyebrow. Yates had no answer for that. He'd been running so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stop. "At least speak with my brother," she pressed. "He's a fair employer. You can make enough to cover your expenses while you heal." The logic of her suggestion was undeniable. With his hand in this condition, he couldn't ride the trail or work cattle. He needed time to heal, and that meant staying put. "All right, Miss Everett, I'll speak with your brother." Her smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Excellent. I'll introduce you now if you're up to it." She helped him to his feet, and as they walked toward the door, Yates found himself studying her profile. There was something about Madeline Everett that intrigued him, a quiet strength beneath her gentle demeanor. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the busy street. Madeline led him to Everett's Mercantile, a well-maintained establishment with large display windows showing an array of goods. Inside, the store was busy with customers, ranchers' wives gathering supplies, cowboys purchasing tobacco, and townspeople browsing the latest shipments from back east. Behind the counter stood a tall man with the same chestnut hair as Madeline, though his was streaked with gray at the temples. "Maddie, there you are," he called when he spotted her. "Mrs. Peterson has been asking about her order." "I'll see to it, Elias," she replied, then gestured to Yates. "This is Mr. Hamilton. He's new in town and in need of employment while his hand heals. I thought of your need for help." Elias Everett's shrewd gaze assessed Yates from head to toe. "Ever worked in a store before, Mr. Hamilton?" "Can't say I have, sir. Been on horseback most of my life." "He's a quick learner," Madeline interjected, "and he'll need only temporary employment, 6 weeks, perhaps 8. Elias scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Well, I do need the help with the summer rush. Can you count, Mr. Hamilton? Read, write?" "Yes to all 3, sir." "And that hand of yours, how'd it happen?" Yates hesitated, aware that the truth might not paint him in the best light. "An altercation," he admitted finally. Elias looked to his sister, who gave a slight nod. "My sister seems to have taken an interest in your welfare, Mr. Hamilton, and I've learned to trust her judgment. I can offer you room and board above the store plus a modest wage. You'll help with inventory, deliveries, and whatever else needs doing that you can manage with one good hand." "Is that acceptable?" The offer was more generous than Yates had expected. "More than fair, Mr. Everett, thank you. You can start tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock sharp." Elias extended his hand and Yates shook it with his left. As they left the mercantile, Madeline seemed pleased with herself. "There, that wasn't so difficult, was it?" "Why are you helping me, Miss Everett?" Yates asked directly. "You don't know anything about me." Her expression softened. "Let's just say I recognize a good man in a difficult situation when I see one, Mr. Hamilton. Everyone deserves a helping hand now and then." With that, she bid him good day and returned to the doctor's office, leaving Yates standing in the street, wondering what twist of fate had brought him to this town, and this woman who seemed determined to help him despite his best efforts to remain a stranger. The room above Everett's mercantile was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small table, and a chair by the window that overlooked the main street of Abilene. Yates placed his few possessions on the table: a well-worn copy of the Odyssey, a shaving kit, a spare shirt, and the revolver he always kept close. The familiar weight of the weapon in his hand was reassuring in this unfamiliar environment. He sat on the edge of the bed, carefully removing his boots with one hand, a task that proved more challenging than he'd anticipated. The simple act reminded him of how vulnerable his injury had left him, how dependent he would be on others until he healed. It wasn't a comfortable feeling for a man who had survived by relying solely on himself. Sleep came fitfully that night, his dreams haunted by the faces of men he'd left behind in Texas, particularly the man whose card cheating had cost Yates his hand, and the man his life. Yates hadn't meant to kill him, but when the knife had appeared and slashed toward his throat, instinct had taken over. The memory of the man's eyes as life left them still haunted Yates, as did the knowledge that the man's brothers had sworn vengeance. He woke before dawn, his body accustomed to early rising from years on the trail. After washing his face and attempting to shave with his left hand, a task that left him with several minor cuts, he dressed and headed downstairs. Elias Everett was already there, unlocking the front door. "Good morning, Mr. Hamilton. Ready for your first day of mercantile work?" Elias's tone was friendly but businesslike. "Ready as I'll ever be, sir." Elias showed him around the store, explaining the organization of goods, the pricing system, and the inventory ledger. "Most of our customers have accounts," he explained. "You'll need to record their purchases accurately. Can you manage a pencil with your left hand?" Yates picked up a pencil from the counter and awkwardly wrote his name on a scrap of paper. The letters were shaky but legible. "That'll do for now," Elias nodded. "You'll improve with practice." The morning passed in a flurry of activity as customers came and went. Yates struggled at first, fumbling with packages and dropping change, but by midday he had begun to develop a system that worked with his limitations. Elias was patient, correcting mistakes without criticism and offering guidance when needed. Just before noon, the bell above the door jingled and Madeline entered, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "I thought you gentlemen might appreciate some lunch," she announced, placing the basket on the counter. The sight of her brought an unexpected lightness to Yates's chest. She wore a simple blue dress today, her hair again in that practical bun with rebellious tendrils framing her face. "You're a saint, Maddie," Elias said, lifting the cloth to reveal sandwiches, apple slices, and what appeared to be freshly baked cookies. Mr. Hamilton and I were just discussing the inventory of canned goods. He's proving to be a quick study. Madeline's gaze met Yates's. I'm not surprised. How's the hand today, Mr. Hamilton? Sore, madam, but I'm managing. Let me take a look after you eat. I brought fresh bandages. They ate in the back room, with Elias regaling them with stories of Abilene's transformation from a quiet farming community to a bustling cattle town. The railroad changed everything, he explained. Now we're the end point for cattle drives from Texas. Every summer brings thousands of longhorns and the cowboys who drive them. And the trouble they bring, Madeline added with a slight frown. The town's grown wilder, that's certain, Elias agreed. But it's brought prosperity too. The mercantile's never done better business. After lunch, while Elias tended to customers, Madeline examined Yates's hand. Her touch was gentle as she removed the bandage and applied a salve to the cuts. The swelling is still significant, but that's to be expected, she said. How's the pain? Manageable, Yates replied, though in truth, the throbbing had been a constant companion. Madeline looked up at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. There's no virtue in suffering unnecessarily, Mr. Hamilton. I can prepare a willow bark tea that will help with the pain. I'm not one for medicines, Miss Everett. It's not laudanum, Mr. Hamilton, just a natural remedy that will take the edge off. Her fingers lingered on his wrist. You don't have to bear everything alone, you know. Her words struck closer to home than she could possibly know. Yates had been bearing his burdens alone for so long he'd forgotten there could be another way. I'll try your tea, he conceded. Her smile was worth the surrender of his stubbornness. I'll bring it by this evening. She finished rewrapping his hand with a fresh bandage. There, keep it elevated when possible. Thank you, Miss Everett. Madeline, she corrected softly, or Maddie if you prefer. Everyone in town calls me one or the other. Madeline, he repeated, liking the feel of her name on his lips. Then I suppose you should call me Yates. Yates, she echoed, and somehow, hearing his name in her voice made it sound better somehow. I should get back to the doctor's office. I'll see you this evening. After she left, the store seemed dimmer somehow, despite the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Yates returned to his task of organizing the stockroom, his thoughts repeatedly drifting back to Madeline's gentle hands and kind eyes. Evening brought a slower pace to the store. As the sunlight faded, Elias lit the lamps and began the process of closing up shop. The bell above the door jingled one last time and Madeline entered, carrying a small jar. As promised, she said, handing it to Yates. Steep a spoonful in hot water before bed. It will help with the pain and help you sleep. Much obliged, Yates replied, accepting the jar. Their fingers brushed briefly, and he felt that same unexpected warmth as before. Maddie, are you joining us for supper? Elias asked as he locked the cash box. I can't tonight. Mrs. Collins is expecting her baby any day now, and Doc wants me to check on her. She turned to Yates. But perhaps Mr. Hamilton Yates would like to join us for Sunday dinner tomorrow, after church. The invitation caught him by surprise. That's kind of you, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition, Elias assured him. Sunday dinner is something of a tradition. We always have room for one more. Please say yes, Madeline added. Martha, Elias's wife, always cooks enough to feed half the town. Faced with their genuine hospitality, Yates found himself nodding. Thank you, I'd be honored. After Madeline left, Elias showed Yates to the small kitchen at the back of the building where a simple supper of beef stew and bread awaited them. As they ate, Elias studied Yates with a thoughtful expression. My sister seems to have taken a shine to you, he said finally. Yates nearly choked on his stew. Sir, I assure you, I've done nothing to encourage. Elias waved away his protest. Relax, Hamilton. I'm not accusing you of anything improper. I'm merely making an observation." He broke off a piece of bread. Maddie has always had a soft heart for those in need. She was the one who convinced Doc Marshall to train her as his assistant, despite the town gossips who thought it unseemly for a young woman. "She seems very capable," Yates offered. "She is. Too capable sometimes for her own good. After our parents died, she took on the responsibility of caring for everyone around her. She forgets sometimes that she deserves happiness too." Elias fixed Yates with a steady gaze. "I don't know what brought you to Abilene, Hamilton, or what you're running from, sir. Let me finish. I don't need to know your past. What matters is how you conduct yourself now. My sister sees something worthwhile in you. I trust her judgment, but I'm also her brother. I won't stand by and see her hurt." Yates met the older man's gaze directly. "I respect your concern, Mr. Everett. I assure you, I have no intentions toward your sister beyond friendship. Once my hand heals, I'll be moving on." Elias nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just know that plans have a way of changing when the heart gets involved." He rose and collected their empty bowls. "Get some rest, Hamilton. The Mercantile opens early on Saturdays." That night, Yates sat by his window, gazing out at the moonlit street below. He sipped the willow bark tea Madeline had prepared, surprised at how quickly it eased the pain in his hand. In the quiet darkness, he allowed himself to think about her, the grace of her movements, the intelligence in her eyes, the compassion in her touch. For the first time in years, Yates Hamilton felt the stirring of something he'd long believed dead within him: hope. Not just for the healing of his hand, but for something more, something he hardly dared name even to himself. It was a dangerous feeling for a man with his past, a man who couldn't afford to put down roots. Yet as he drifted off to sleep, it was Madeline's face that followed him into his dreams, replacing the haunting memories that usually plagued his nights. And for once, he slept peacefully, his broken hand resting on a pillow, his troubled heart finding momentary respite in the possibility of something he'd never thought to find in Abilene, Kansas, a chance at redemption. The next few days fell into a rhythm that Yates found surprisingly comfortable. Mornings began early at the Mercantile, with Elias teaching him the business of running a store. By the third day, Yates could manage the ledger with his left hand well enough to record transactions, and he'd developed a system for wrapping packages one-handed that, while not elegant, was functional. Madeline visited daily, ostensibly to check on his hand, but their conversations increasingly strayed beyond medical matters. He learned that she'd been assisting Doc Marshall for nearly 5 years, that she had a passion for reading, particularly the novels of Charles Dickens, and that she had once dreamed of attending medical school back east before family responsibilities had kept her in Abilene. In turn, he shared carefully edited stories of his life on the trail cattle drives through Indian Territory, winters in Colorado mining camps, a brief stint as a scout for the Army. He kept the darker parts of his past to himself, the parts that had led to the price on his head in Texas, and the nightmares that still woke him in a cold sweat. Sunday dawned bright and clear. Yates rose early, shaved carefully with his left hand, and put on his cleanest shirt. He'd never been one for church attendance, but when Madeline had asked if he'd join them for the service before dinner, he'd found himself unable to refuse. The small church was crowded when he arrived. Madeline, spotting him hesitating in the doorway, waved him over to where she sat with Elias and his wife Martha, a plump, cheerful woman with kind eyes who immediately made room for Yates on the pew. "We're so pleased you could join us, Mr. Hamilton," Martha whispered as the preacher approached the pulpit. "Maddie has told us all about you." Yates glanced at Madeline, who blushed slightly and focused intently on her hymnal. The service passed in a blur for Yates, who found his attention repeatedly drawn to the woman beside him rather than the preacher's words about forgiveness and redemption. After church, they walked to Elias and Martha's home, a comfortable two-story house at the edge of town. The Sunday dinner exceeded Yates's expectations: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh corn, biscuits, and an apple pie that Martha proudly declared was Madeline's contribution. "Maddie's the only one of us who inherited our mother's talent for baking," Elias explained as he helped himself to a second slice. "It's delicious," Yates agreed, earning a pleased smile from Madeline. As the afternoon progressed, Yates found himself more relaxed than he'd been in years. There was something about the simple domesticity of the scene: Martha and Madeline clearing dishes, Elias smoking his pipe on the porch, the gentle hum of conversation that awakened a longing in him he'd long suppressed. Later, as the sun began to set, Madeline suggested a walk. "The evening is too beautiful to waste indoors," she said, and Yates readily agreed. They strolled along the outskirts of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The summer evening was warm, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple as the sun dipped toward the horizon. "How's the hand feeling today?" Madeline asked, her skirts swishing gently against the tall grass. "Better," Yates admitted. "Your tea helps." "I'm glad." She glanced at him. "And how are you finding life as a shopkeeper?" "Different," he chuckled. "Less dust, more talking." "You don't miss the trail?" Yates considered the question. "Parts of it. The freedom, the open sky, but there's something to be said for sleeping in the same bed each night and having regular meals." "And company?" she asked softly. "Yes," he agreed, meeting her gaze. "The company makes a difference." They walked in companionable silence for a while until Madeline spoke again. "You never talk about your family, Yates. Do you have one somewhere?" The question was innocent, but it touched on wounds that had never fully healed. "Not anymore," he replied after a moment. "My parents died when I was young, raised by an uncle until I was old enough to saddle my own horse and make my own way." "I'm sorry," she said, and he could tell she meant it. "It's hard losing family." "You lost yours too, I gather." Madeline nodded. "Mother 5 years ago to influenza, father the year after. Heart failure," Doc Marshall said, "but Elias and I always thought he died of a broken heart. They were devoted to each other." "You have Elias, at least." "Yes, and Martha. They've been trying to start a family for years." A shadow crossed her face. "It's been difficult for them." "And you?" Yates asked before he could stop himself. "No suitors vying for your attention," she laughed softly. "There was a banker's son from Topeka who came calling last year." "Mother would have approved, respectable profession, good family," she shrugged. "But there was no spark." "Spark," Yates echoed. "That feeling when you meet someone and something just ignites." Her eyes met his, and the air between them seemed suddenly charged. "Haven't you ever felt it?" Before he could answer, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted the moment. Dark clouds were building on the horizon, promising a summer storm. "We should head back," Yates said reluctantly, noting how far they'd wandered from town. They turned back, walking more quickly as the wind picked up. The first fat raindrops began to fall when they were still a good half-mile from town. Yates removed his coat and held it over Madeline, who protested weakly, but accepted the gesture. The rain intensified rapidly, and soon they were both drenched despite the coat. Madeline's laughter, bright and uninhibited as she splashed through puddles forming on the path, did something strange to Yates's heart. They took shelter beneath the overhang of a deserted cattle pen at the edge of town. Madeline wrung water from her skirts, her hair having come completely loose from its pins to hang in wet tendrils around her face. She'd never looked more beautiful to Yates than in that moment, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, completely unguarded. "I must look a fright," she said, attempting to smooth her hair. "No," Yates said softly. "You don't." Their eyes met, and that spark she'd spoken of flickered between them, growing stronger with each heartbeat. Yates knew he should look away, step back, remember all the reasons why he had no business feeling what he was feeling for Madeline Everett. But then she moved closer, her hand coming up to rest lightly on his chest, just above his thundering heart. "Yates," she whispered, his name a question and an invitation. He answered by lowering his head and brushing his lips against hers, the barest touch, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she leaned into him, her free hand coming up to touch his face as the kiss deepened. The rain drummed on the roof above them, creating a private world where nothing existed but the two of them, and this moment that seemed both impossible and inevitable. When they finally broke apart, Madeline's eyes were wide, her lips curved in a smile that made Yates want to kiss her again immediately. Instead, he touched her cheek with his good hand, memorizing the feel of her skin. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, though he couldn't bring himself to regret it. "Why not?" she challenged. "I wanted you to. I've wanted you to since the day you walked into Doc's office." The simple honesty of her confession humbled him. "Madeline, you don't know me, not really." "I know enough," she insisted. "I know you're kind even when you try to hide it. I know you're honest in your dealings with others. I know you're careful with your past because it pains you." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. "The rest I can learn if you'll let me." Yates closed his eyes briefly, torn between desire and duty. "You deserve better than a drifter with a broken hand and a past he can't escape." "Let me be the judge of what I deserve," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "And as for that broken hand, let me be the one to hold the other until it heals." She took his left hand in both of hers, raising it to her lips. "And perhaps beyond that, if you're willing to stay." The rain began to ease, and with it, some of the tension drained from Yates's shoulders. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know if he could outrun his past forever. But in that moment, with Madeline looking at him as though he were worth staying for, he allowed himself to hope. "We should get you home before your brother sends out a search party," he said. But he didn't release her hand as they stepped back into the light drizzle. They walked back to town slowly, hands linked, neither in a hurry to end the moment. As they approached Elias's house, Madeline turned to face him once more. "Will I see you tomorrow?" she asked. "I'll be at the store," he reminded her with a smile. "Good." She rose on tiptoes to place a quick kiss on his cheek. "Don't forget to use the tea for your hand." "I won't," he promised, watching as she hurried up the path to the house. As he walked back to his room above the Mercantile, Yates knew he was venturing into dangerous territory. A man with his past had no business dreaming of a future with a woman like Madeline. Yet he couldn't deny the feeling that had taken root in his heart, a feeling that grew stronger with each passing day. For the first time in years, Yates Hamilton had found something worth staying for. The question was whether his past would allow him to do so. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of work at the Mercantile, regular visits from Madeline, and stolen moments together when they could manage them. They shared walks in the evening, conversations over lunch, and increasingly passionate kisses in the shadows of the Mercantile's storeroom when Elias was occupied with customers. Yates's hand was healing well, the swelling reduced, the cuts closing cleanly. Madeline's care had prevented infection, and though the bones would take longer to knit, the pain had subsided to a dull ache that was manageable without medication most days. As his physical pain diminished, however, his inner turmoil grew. Each day spent in Abilene, each moment with Madeline, made the thought of eventually leaving more painful. Yet he knew he couldn't stay forever. Sooner or later, his past would catch up with him, and he couldn't risk bringing danger to Madeline's door. One evening, as they sat on a bench outside the doctor's office watching the sunset, Madeline sensed his preoccupation. "What's troubling you, Yates?" she asked, her hand resting lightly on his knee. He covered her hand with his. "Just thinking about the future." "And does this future include Abilene?" Her voice was casual, but he could hear the tension beneath the question. "Madeline," he began carefully, "when I came here, I never intended to stay. I can't promise. I'm not asking for promises," she interrupted. "Not yet. I just want to know if you're still planning to leave the moment your hand heals." Yates looked into her eyes, finding it increasingly difficult to imagine a life without her in it. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "A few weeks ago, the answer would have been yes without hesitation. Now—" He trailed off, squeezing her hand. "Now I find myself thinking of reasons to stay." Her smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "That's a start," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky deepened from orange to purple to the deep blue of early evening. As the first stars appeared, Madeline straightened suddenly. "I almost forgot. The town's hosting a dance this Saturday at the schoolhouse. The last one before the cattle season ends and the Cowboys head back south." She turned to face him, eyes bright with excitement. "Will you go with me?" The thought of a public dance, with its crowds and scrutiny, made Yates uneasy. He'd been careful to keep a low profile in town, avoiding the saloons and anywhere else where transient cowboys might recognize him from his Texas days. "I'm not much for dancing, especially with this hand," he hedged. "Nonsense. You can still manage a waltz. Besides, it's not really about the dancing." Her expression grew mischievous. "It's about having an excuse to hold me close in public." Put that way, Yates found it hard to refuse. "All right," he conceded, "but don't blame me when I step on your toes." Madeline's delighted laugh was worth any risk. Saturday evening arrived clear and warm. Yates dressed with unusual care, borrowing a tie from Elias, who offered it along with some pointed advice about respecting his sister's reputation. The warning was unnecessary. Yates was all too aware of the gap between what Madeline deserved and what a man like him could offer. The schoolhouse had been transformed for the occasion. Desks pushed against the walls, lanterns hanging from the rafters casting a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band played on a makeshift stage, and couples already filled the dance floor when Yates arrived to meet Madeline. She waited outside with Elias and Martha, a vision in a blue dress that matched her eyes, her chestnut hair arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. Yates's steps faltered momentarily at the sight of her, and the smile she gave him when she noticed his approach made his heart skip a beat. "You look beautiful," he said simply when he reached her. "Thank you," she replied, a blush coloring her cheeks. "You clean up rather nicely yourself, Mr. Hamilton." The evening passed in a pleasant haze. Yates managed the dances better than he'd expected, his good hand holding Madeline's, his injured one resting lightly at her waist. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, her skirts swirling around them, her laughter a melody that complemented the music. During a break in the dancing, as they sipped punch by the open windows, Madeline introduced him to various townspeople, the mayor and his wife, the school teacher, the blacksmith and his family. To Yates's surprise, he was welcomed without suspicion, accepted as Miss Everett's gentleman friend with easy smiles and friendly conversation. "Everyone likes you," Madeline observed as they stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "They like you," Yates corrected. "They're merely being polite to me because of you." "That's not true, Mrs." Anderson was telling me just yesterday how grateful she is for the way you helped her son carry feed sacks to their wagon, even with your injured hand." Yates shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing to her. Madeline studied his face in the moonlight. "Why is it so hard for you to accept that you might belong here, Yates? That people might want you to stay?" The question hit too close to home, touching on fears and hopes he'd been trying to ignore. "Because I've never belonged anywhere, not really," he admitted finally. "And because there are things in my past that would change how these good people see me if they knew." Madeline stepped closer, placing her hands on his chest. "Then tell me, whatever it is, it won't change how I feel about you." Yates wanted desperately to believe her, but experience had taught him that some secrets were too heavy for even the strongest feelings to bear. Before he could respond, the schoolhouse door opened and several couples spilled out, laughing and talking. "There you are, Maddie," Martha called. "They're about to play the last waltz." The moment for confidences was lost. Madeline gave him a look that said their conversation wasn't over, but allowed him to lead her back inside for the final dance. As they moved across the floor, Yates held her closer than propriety strictly allowed, savoring the feel of her in his arms, trying to memorize every detail: the scent of lavender in her hair, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she fit against him as if made to be there. "What are you thinking?" she murmured, looking up at him with those clear, honest eyes that seemed to see straight through his defenses. "That I'm going to miss this," he replied without thinking. Her steps faltered slightly. "So you are planning to leave?" Yates cursed himself for his careless words. "Madeline." But whatever he might have said was interrupted by a commotion at the door. Heads turned as three men entered, their trail-worn appearance and the pistols strapped to their hips marking them as cowboys passing through. Their loud voices and unsteady gait suggested they'd already visited one of Abilene's saloons before arriving at the dance. Yates stiffened, instinctively turning Madeline so that his back was to the newcomers. Something about their silhouettes was familiar in a way that sent a chill down his spine. "What is it?" Madeline asked, sensing his sudden tension. "Nothing," he said, forcing a smile. "Just some late arrivals who have had too much to drink." The music ended and couples began to disperse, some heading for home, others gathering in small groups to continue conversations. Elias approached, frowning at the rowdy cowboys who were now helping themselves to punch. "Time to head home, I think," he said to Madeline, "before those fellows decide to liven things up further." Yates nodded in agreement, keeping his face turned away from the newcomers. "I'll walk you home." They were almost to the door when one of the cowboys spoke, his voice carrying across the now quieter room. "Well, I'll be damned if it ain't Yates Hamilton." The blood froze in Yates's veins. Slowly, he turned to face the speaker, a lanky man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. Recognition dawned immediately. It was Jeremiah Dawson, one of the brothers of the man Yates had killed in that Texas saloon. "You know this man, Hamilton?" Elias asked, confusion evident in his tone. Before Yates could respond, Jeremiah continued, his voice slurring slightly. "Oh, we know each other real well, don't we, Hamilton? Last time I saw you, you were running out of a saloon in Lerdo with my brother's blood on your hands." A murmur ran through the remaining partygoers. Madeline's hand tightened on Yates's arm. "Yates." "Get Madeline out of here," Yates said quietly to Elias, who hesitated, torn between protecting his sister and loyalty to his employee. "Not so fast," Jeremiah said, stepping forward. His two companions flanked him, their hands hovering near their weapons. "Folks around here should know who they're harboring. This man's a killer with a price on his head in Texas. Shot my brother dead over a card game." "It wasn't like that," Yates said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. Your brother pulled a knife on me. It was self-defense. That's not how the sheriff in Laredo sees it, one of Jeremiah's companions interjected. He's got a wanted poster with your face on it, Hamilton. Madeline looked up at Yates, her face pale but resolute. Is it true? Are you wanted for murder? Yates met her gaze, knowing he owed her the truth, however painful. The killing was self-defense, but yes, there's a warrant for my arrest in Texas. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to bring trouble to your door. He looked around at the shocked faces of the townspeople he'd come to know. I never meant for any of this to touch you. Well, it has now, Jeremiah said with a cruel smile, and we aim to collect that bounty, or maybe just finish what my brother started. His hand moved to his gun. Not here, Elias said firmly, stepping forward. Whatever quarrel you have with Hamilton, you won't settle it in a schoolhouse with women and children present. The town mayor, a stocky man with an impressive mustache, moved to stand beside Elias. This is Abilene, not some lawless territory. We have a marshal in this town, and he'll handle this matter according to the law. Jeremiah's eyes narrowed, calculating his odds against an increasingly united front of townspeople. Finally, he spat on the floor. Fine. We'll let your marshal sort it out. But he tries to run again. We'll hunt him down. The tension in the room remained palpable as Jeremiah and his companions backed toward the door. We'll be watching, Hamilton, he called as they left. In the ensuing silence, Yates became acutely aware of Madeline still standing beside him, her hand no longer on his arm. When he turned to her, the hurt and confusion in her eyes was like a physical blow. Madeline, he began, but she shook her head. Not here, she said quietly, echoing Elias's words. There's been enough of a scene already. The walk back to Elias's house was conducted in tense silence. Martha had gone ahead with some neighbors, leaving Elias to escort Madeline with Yates following a few steps behind, feeling like a condemned man walking to the gallows. At the house, Elias turned to him. I think it's best if you don't come inside tonight, Hamilton. We all need time to process what's happened. Yates nodded, understanding but still wounded by the rejection. Can I speak to Madeline for a moment, privately? Elias looked to his sister, who hesitated before nodding. 5 minutes, Elias conceded, stepping onto the porch but remaining within sight. Once they were relatively alone, Yates struggled to find words. I should have told you, he began. I wanted to, especially after the dance when you asked about my past, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? Madeline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of seeing exactly what I see in your eyes right now, disappointment, disillusionment. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I never lied to you about who I am now, Madeline, just about who I was. But they're the same person, Yates. The man who killed someone in Texas is the same man who's been helping elderly customers at the Mercantile and walking me home in the evenings. Her eyes searched his face. Did he deserve to die, this man you killed? The question caught him off guard. He'd expected condemnation, not this attempt to understand. No, he answered honestly. He was cheating at cards, and when I called him on it, he pulled a knife. I didn't go into that saloon looking to kill anyone. I didn't even draw first. But when it was over, he was dead, and his brothers were swearing vengeance, and the sheriff, who happened to be their cousin, wasn't interested in hearing my side. Madeline was silent for a long moment, processing his words. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me this before? It wasn't about trust, Yates insisted. It was about protecting you. I didn't want my troubles to become yours. That wasn't your decision to make, she replied, a flash of anger in her eyes. I'm not some delicate flower who needs sheltering from harsh realities, Yates. I assist in surgeries. I've helped bring children into this world, and I've watched people leave it. I can handle difficult truths." Her words struck home. He'd underestimated her strength, tried to protect her when perhaps what she needed was his honesty. "You're right," he acknowledged. "I should have trusted you with the truth." "Yes, you should have." Some of the anger faded from her expression, replaced by weariness. "What will you do now?" It was the question he'd been dreading. "The safest thing for everyone would be for me to leave Abilene. Tonight." "Running again," she observed. "Is that really what you want?" Yates looked at her, memorizing the features he'd come to cherish. "What I want doesn't matter. What matters is keeping you safe." "And what about what I want?" Madeline stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "Don't I get a say in this?" "Madeline, no," she interrupted. "Listen to me, Yates Hamilton. I've spent my entire life doing what's expected of me, what's proper and sensible. For once, I want to choose something for myself, even if it's complicated and messy and uncertain." She took his hands in hers, both the injured and the whole. "I choose you. Whatever comes with that choice, whatever we have to face, we'll face it together." Her declaration left him speechless. In all his years of drifting, no one had ever chosen to stand with him, to face his troubles as their own. "It won't be easy," he warned. "Those men won't give up." "Nothing worthwhile ever is easy," she replied with a small smile. "Besides, you're forgetting something important." "What's that?" "This isn't Texas. This is Kansas, and you have friends here." She squeezed his hands. "We'll speak to Marshal Thompson in the morning, explain the situation. He's a fair man. And if he decides to turn me over to the Texas authorities, then we'll fight that battle when it comes." Her expression softened. "For now, go back to your room. Get some rest. And Yates," she leaned forward to place a gentle kiss on his lips, "don't you dare leave without saying goodbye." Yates made his way back to the Mercantile, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Madeline's faith in him was humbling, her courage inspiring. But the practical part of him, the part that had survived by staying one step ahead of trouble, knew that the safest course would be to saddle his horse and ride out tonight. Yet as he climbed the stairs to his room, he found he couldn't bring himself to pack his meager belongings. The thought of leaving Abilene, of leaving Madeline, felt like contemplating cutting off his own arm. Somewhere in the past weeks, this place and its people had become more than just a temporary haven. They had become something dangerously close to home. He sat on the edge of his bed, his broken hand a reminder of how vulnerability could sometimes lead to unexpected blessings. If he hadn't been injured, he never would have stayed in Abilene, never would have met Madeline, never would have experienced the sense of belonging that now made the thought of leaving so painful. "Let me be the one to hold the other," she had said that first day, offering support when he was at his weakest. Now she was offering something even more precious, a chance to stop running, to face his past with someone by his side. Yates Hamilton had spent years believing he was destined to be alone. Now, for the first time, he dared to imagine a different future. Whether that future would come to pass remained to be seen, but he knew one thing with certainty: he couldn't walk away from Madeline Everett without fighting for the chance they deserved. With that resolution, he stretched out on the bed, not to sleep, but to plan. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight he allowed himself to hope. Morning came with a knock on Yates's door. He was already awake, having slept little, his mind occupied with contingency plans and half-formed strategies. When he opened the door, expecting Elias or perhaps the marshal, he was surprised to find Madeline standing there, her expression determined. "Marshal Thompson will see us at 8, she said without preamble. "I've already spoken with him briefly." Yates checked his pocket watch. "That's in half an hour," she nodded. "Just enough time for breakfast. Martha sent this." She held up a basket covered with a cloth, Over coffee and Martha's fresh biscuits, Madeline outlined what she'd learned that morning. The Dawson brothers are staying at the Drovers Inn. Marshal Thompson has spoken to them, told them to keep the peace while he investigates their claims. They won't wait long, Yates warned. Men like that don't respect the law, which is why we need to clear your name quickly. She reached into her pocket and extracted a folded piece of paper. I sent a telegraph to the sheriff in Lerdo last night asking for confirmation of the charges against you. Yates stared at her in amazement. You did what? Elias knows the telegraph operator. He opened the office specially. She unfolded the paper. The reply came this morning. Yates took the telegram with trepidation. Reading the terse message, charges against Hamilton, question stop new evidence suggests self-defense, stop corroborating witness came forward, stop case under review, stop Sheriff J. Collins, Lerdo. I don't understand, Yates said, rereading the telegram. What new evidence? What witness? Madeline's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. It seems the Dawson brothers aren't as well liked as they believe. Someone in Lerdo is willing to testify that Harold Dawson drew first. Hope, fragile and tentative, began to take root in Yates's chest. This doesn't mean I'm cleared, but it's a start. It's more than that, Madeline insisted. It's enough to convince Marshal Thompson not to turn you over to the Dawsons. The rest we can fight through proper legal channels. She reached across the table to take his hand. You don't have to run anymore, Yates. The meeting with Marshal Thompson went better than Yates had dared hope. The marshal, a former judge with a reputation for fairness, listened attentively as Yates recounted the events in Lerdo, then examined the telegram from Sheriff Collins. Based on this, the marshal said finally, I see no grounds to detain you, Hamilton. The matter appears to be under legitimate review by the Texas authorities. His stern gaze fixed on Yates. However, I expect you to remain in Abilene until we receive further clarification. And I'll not have any trouble between you and the Dawsons while they're in my town. Understood, Marshal, Yates agreed readily. I have no desire for further confrontation. See that it stays that way. Thompson turned to Madeline. Miss Everett, your brother speaks highly of Mr. Hamilton's character. I hope his judgment proves sound. It will, Madeline assured him with a confidence that warmed Yates's heart. As they left the marshal's office, Yates felt lighter than he had in months. The threat wasn't gone, the Dawsons were still in town, and the charges in Texas weren't fully dismissed, but for the first time, he could see a path forward that didn't involve abandoning everything he'd come to care about. What now? He asked as they walked toward the mercantile. Madeline linked her arm through his. Now you go back to work. I go back to the doctor's office and we continue living our lives while we wait for final word from Texas. Just like that, she smiled up at him. Just like that. That's what ordinary people do, Yates. They face their problems, and they go on living. Ordinary. It wasn't a word Yates had ever associated with himself. But as he walked beside Madeline, he found himself craving the very ordinariness she described, the simple rhythm of days spent working, evenings spent in conversation, a life built on something more substantial than the next horizon. The next week passed in a state of cautious normalcy. Yates continued his work at the mercantile, his hand healing steadily under Madeline's care. The Dawson brothers remained in town, watching him from a distance but making no move to confront him directly, likely deterred by Marshal Thompson's visible presence on the streets. Word of Yates's situation had spread through town, as news inevitably did in small communities. To his surprise, the reaction was mixed but not universally negative. Some regarded him with newfound suspicion, crossing the street to avoid passing too close. Others, particularly those who had come to know him through the mercantile, made a point of expressing their support. "My Thomas says any man can find himself on the wrong side of trouble through no fault of his own," Mrs. Peterson told him earnestly as he helped her select fabric for a new dress. "What matters is how he conducts himself after." Such moments of acceptance were balm to Yates's soul, evidence that perhaps Madeline was right, perhaps he could belong here after all. The most significant change was in his relationship with Madeline. Their feelings for each other, once carefully contained behind the boundaries of propriety, now grew openly, nurtured by shared adversity and mutual respect. They spent every available moment together, talking for hours about their hopes and dreams, their fears and failures. For the first time, Yates shared the full story of his past, not just the incident in Lerdo, but the years of drifting before, the loneliness that had been his constant companion, the guilt he carried for actions taken and opportunities missed. And Madeline, in turn, confided her own struggles, the weight of responsibility she'd shouldered after her parents' deaths, her abandoned dreams of medical school, her fear of ending up alone. "I never thought I'd find someone who understood me," she admitted one evening as they sat on the back porch of Elias's house, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "Someone who sees me as more than just the doctor's assistant or Elias's sister." "I see all of you," Yates assured her, his fingers tracing patterns on her palm. "The healer, the dreamer, the woman too stubborn for her own good." He smiled at her indignant expression. "And I love every part." The words slipped out naturally, unplanned but unquestionably true. Madeline's breath caught, her eyes widening. "You love me," she whispered. Yates nodded, suddenly fearful he'd spoken too soon. "I do. I know it hasn't been long, and I know the timing is far from ideal," but she silenced him with a kiss, her hands framing his face. "I love you too," she said against his lips. "I think I have since you walked into Doc's office with that broken hand, and too much pride to admit how much it hurt." They stayed there, wrapped in each other's arms, until Elias called Madeline in for supper. As she rose to go, Yates caught her hand. "When this is over," he said, "when the matter with the Dawsons is resolved one way or another, I want to talk about our future. A real future together." The smile she gave him was radiant. "I'd like that very much." 2 days later, a second telegram arrived from Lerdo. Sheriff Collins confirmed that the charges against Yates had been officially withdrawn. The witness, a barmaid who had been present during the altercation, had provided a sworn statement that Harold Dawson had indeed drawn his knife first, with clear intent to do serious harm. The matter was now considered closed by Texas authorities. Yates's first instinct was to find Madeline and share the news, but Elias stopped him as he headed for the door. "The Dawsons know," he said grimly. "Telegraph operator's son overheard them talking at the barber shop. They're not taking it well." Concern for Madeline immediately overshadowed Yates's relief. "Where is she?" "At the doctor's office. Martha's with her." Elias's expression was troubled. "Marshal Thompson's looking for the Dawsons now, but they've gone to ground. He thinks they might be planning something." Yates's mind raced. The Dawsons had lost their legal means of retribution, which made them more dangerous, not less. Men like that, motivated by vengeance rather than justice, wouldn't simply accept defeat and move on. "I need to get to Madeline," he said, already moving toward the door. "I'll come with you," Elias offered, reaching for his coat. They were halfway to the doctor's office when the sound of breaking glass and a woman's scream froze them in their tracks. The sound had come from the direction they were headed. Yates broke into a run, Elias close behind. As they rounded the corner, they saw the door to the doctor's office standing open, glass from the window scattered on the boardwalk. Inside, they found Martha huddled in a corner, a cut on her forehead bleeding freely. "They took her," she sobbed when she saw them. "The Dawsons. They took Madeline." Cold fury washed over Yates, followed by a clarity of purpose he hadn't felt in years. "Where's Doc Marshall?" he asked, helping Martha to a chair. "Making a house call at the Collins farm," she replied. "Won't be back till evening." "Did they say where they were taking her?" Elias demanded, his face pale with fear for his sister. Martha shook her head. "Just that you know where to find them, Yates. That it was time to finish what began in Laredo." Yates knew exactly what they meant. They wanted to draw him out, away from town and the protection of the marshal. And they were using Madeline as bait. "Stay with Martha," he told Elias. "Get the marshal. Tell him the Dawsons have taken Madeline to the old cattle pens east of town." "How do you know that's where they've gone?" Elias asked. "Because that's where I'd go if I wanted privacy and a clear view of anyone approaching," Yates replied grimly. "It's where I'd set a trap." "You can't go alone," Elias protested. "They'll kill you." "If I wait for the marshal, they might harm Madeline," Yates countered, his mind made up. "I can't risk that." Before Elias could argue further, Yates was gone, moving with purpose toward the livery stable. His hand, though not fully healed, was strong enough to grip a revolver, and for Madeline, he would risk everything. The ride to the cattle pens took less than 20 minutes at a hard gallop. As Yates approached, he slowed his horse, scanning the area for signs of movement. The pens were abandoned this time of year, the holding areas empty between cattle drives. The main structure, a rough building used for sorting and branding, stood silent and watchful in the late afternoon sun. Yates dismounted a short distance away, tethering his horse loosely to allow for a quick escape if necessary. Drawing his revolver, he approached cautiously, alert for any movement or sound that might betray an ambush. "Dawson," he called when he was within earshot of the building. "I'm here, just like you wanted. Let Madeline go. She has nothing to do with this." For a moment there was no response. Then the door to the building creaked open and Jeremiah Dawson appeared, his lanky frame silhouetted against the dim interior. Well. The killer shows some backbone after all." Jeremiah's voice carried a sneer. "Throw down your weapon and come inside, Hamilton. Then we'll talk about the lady's future." "I want to see her first," Yates demanded, keeping his revolver trained on Dawson. "Proof she's unharmed." Jeremiah gestured to someone inside, and Madeline was pushed into the doorway, her hands bound before her, a bruise forming on her cheek but otherwise appearing uninjured. Her eyes widened when she saw Yates. "Don't do this," she called to him. "They'll kill you." She was yanked back inside before she could finish, and Jeremiah's grin widened. "Satisfied? Now drop the gun, or the next time you see her, she'll be considerably worse for wear." Yates weighed his options rapidly. He was outnumbered 3-1, and Madeline's safety was his primary concern. Slowly, he placed his revolver on the ground. "Kick it away," Jeremiah instructed, and Yates complied, sending the weapon skidding several feet to his right. "Now come inside. Nice and slow." As Yates approached the building, he noted the positions of shadows within, trying to gauge where the other Dawson brothers might be. He entered cautiously, his eyes adjusting to the dimmer light inside. The interior was open and cavernous, with pens along one side and a raised platform at the far end, where record-keeping and branding took place. Madeline stood on this platform, now guarded by one of the Dawson brothers, the youngest, Luke, barely 20 and already showing the same mean streak as his older siblings. The third brother, Matthew, stood to Yates's left, a shotgun in his hands. "You've got me," Yates said evenly. "Let her go." "Your quarrel's with me, not her." Jeremiah circled him like a predator, clearly enjoying the moment. "That might have been true before she started sending telegrams to Laredo, stirring up trouble for us. Now she's earned a share of our attention." Yates's eyes met Madeline's across the room. Despite the danger, she stood tall, her gaze steady and unafraid. Her courage strengthened his resolve. "The sheriff in Laredo has withdrawn the charges," Yates said, addressing all three brothers. "It's over. The law has spoken." "The law," Matthew spat. "The law didn't bring our brother back, did it? The law didn't make his wife a widow or his children fatherless." "I'm sorry about your brother," Yates said sincerely, "but he drew on me first. I had no choice." "Liar!" Luke shouted, his young face contorted with grief and rage. He yanked Madeline closer, pressing a knife to her throat. "Harold would never have drawn first. He was a fair man." "He was a card cheat and a bully," Yates replied steadily, "but he didn't deserve to die for it. If I could change what happened, I would." "Too late for that," Jeremiah said, drawing his revolver. "But it's not too late for justice. An eye for an eye, Hamilton. You took our brother. Seems only fair we take something of yours." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Madeline, and cold fear gripped Yates's heart. "Wait," he said quickly. "You want revenge, take it on me. Let her go and I won't fight you." Jeremiah seemed to consider this, exchanging glances with his brothers. "Tempting," he admitted, "but I think I'd rather you watch her die first, make you suffer the way we've suffered." He raised his revolver, aiming not at Yates but at Madeline. Time seemed to slow as Yates calculated distances and odds, knowing he couldn't reach Jeremiah before the shot, knowing he had to try anyway. As he tensed to launch himself forward in a desperate bid to save Madeline, the air was suddenly split by the crack of a rifle shot. Jeremiah jerked backward, his revolver discharging harmlessly into the ceiling as he fell, blood blossoming on his shoulder. "Drop your weapons." Marshal Thompson's authoritative voice boomed from the doorway. He stood with his rifle still raised, Elias and two deputies flanking him, all armed and determined. What followed was a brief but tense standoff. Matthew, seeing his brother down and recognizing the odds had turned against them, reluctantly lowered his shotgun. Luke, however, kept his knife at Madeline's throat, using her as a shield. "Let her go, son," the marshal said calmly. "No one else needs to get hurt today." "They killed Harold," Luke said, his voice breaking. "Someone has to pay." "And someone will," Thompson assured him. "Through the courts the way it should be. Kidnapping and threatening Miss Everett are serious crimes. Don't add murder to the list." For a terrible moment, Yates thought the boy might slash Madeline's throat out of sheer desperation. But then Madeline spoke, her voice gentle despite her precarious position. "Luke," she said softly, "I know you loved your brother. I love my brother too." She nodded toward Elias. "Think about what Harold would want. Would he want you to hang for murder?" The question seemed to reach something in the young man. His hand trembled and slowly, the knife lowered. A deputy moved swiftly to disarm him, and Madeline was free, running straight into Yates's waiting arms. He held her tightly, his good hand cradling the back of her head, his injured one wrapped securely around her waist. "Are you hurt?" he murmured against her hair. "No," she assured him, her voice muffled against his chest. "Just angry at being used as bait, and worried about you." "Why did you come alone?" That was incredibly foolish. Despite everything, Yates found himself smiling. Only Madeline would scold him for rescuing her. "I couldn't risk them harming you while I waited for reinforcements." "I wasn't planning to wait," Elias interjected, joining them as the deputies led the Dawson brothers away. Jeremiah's wound, while painful, wasn't life-threatening. "I sent one deputy for the marshal and came straight here with the other." "Thank you," Yates said simply, extending his hand to the man who had become more than an employer, a friend, and perhaps, if Yates's hopes came to fruition, a brother. Elias shook his hand firmly. "No need for thanks. We're family." His gaze included both Yates and Madeline in that statement. and the implication wasn't lost on either of them. As they rode back to town, Madeline insisted on sharing Yates's horse, claiming she was too shaken to ride alone. As they followed the marshal's party, she leaned back against Yates's chest, her hands covering his where they held the reins. "You called me yours," she said quietly. "When Jeremiah threatened to take something of yours, we both knew he meant me." Yates tensed, uncertain how she felt about that presumption. "I shouldn't have spoken for you," he began. "No," she interrupted, turning slightly to look up at him. "I liked it. I am yours, Yates, just as you are mine." The simple declaration warmed him more than any passionate avowal could have. In that moment, with Madeline safe in his arms and the Dawson threat neutralized, Yates allowed himself to fully embrace the future he'd been afraid to imagine. "I was thinking," he said casually, "now that my hand is nearly healed and my name is cleared, I might look into purchasing that vacant lot next to the mercantile. I hear the owner's willing to sell for a reasonable price." Madeline's eyes widened. "You're staying in Abilene?" "I am," he confirmed. "If you're amenable, I thought I might open a leather goods shop. I've always had a knack for working with my hands, and there's a need for quality saddles and tack in a cattle town." "That's a wonderful idea," she said enthusiastically. "But why that particular lot?" Yates smiled, enjoying the moment. "Well, it's conveniently located between the mercantile and the doctor's office. Easy walking distance for a man who might want to visit his wife during the workday." Madeline's breath caught. "Wife, if she'll have me," Yates replied, suddenly uncertain. Perhaps he was moving too quickly, assuming too much. Madeline's response was to twist in the saddle and press her lips to his in a kiss that left no doubt about her answer. When they broke apart, her eyes were shining with happiness and unshed tears. "Is that a yes?" Yates asked, his heart pounding with hope. "Yes," she said simply. 1,000 times yes." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Yates's life. The Dawson brothers were tried for kidnapping and assault, receiving sentences that would keep them imprisoned for several years. Sheriff Collins from Laredo sent official documentation clearing Yates's name, along with a letter of apology for the miscarriage of justice that had nearly occurred. With his name cleared and his future in Abilene secured, Yates set about establishing his leather goods shop. He purchased the vacant lot, and with help from Elias and other friends he'd made in town, began construction of a small but well-designed building. His hand healed completely, with only a slight stiffness in 2 fingers to remind him of the injury that had brought him to Abilene and to Madeline. He developed techniques to compensate for this minor limitation, and soon his saddles and harnesses were gaining a reputation for quality craftsmanship throughout the region. Madeline continued her work with Doc Marshall, her knowledge and skills expanding under his tutelage. The doctor, impressed by her dedication and natural ability, began speaking of retirement and the possibility of Madeline taking a more prominent role in the practice. Their wedding took place on a perfect autumn day, with the leaves of the cottonwoods along the creek turning gold and crimson. The entire town seemed to turn out for the occasion, the church filled to capacity, and well wishes showered upon them like confetti. Madeline was radiant in a gown of ivory silk, her chestnut hair adorned with tiny white flowers. As she walked down the aisle on Elias's arm, Yates felt a surge of gratitude so profound it nearly overwhelmed him. This woman, this extraordinary, brave, compassionate woman had seen beyond his broken hand and troubled past to the man he could be, the man he wanted to be for her. When the minister asked who gave this woman in marriage, Elias's voice rang clear. "Her brother, on behalf of our parents who would have been so proud this day." And when it came time for their vows, Madeline added a personal touch that brought tears to Yates's eyes and smiles to the congregation. "With this ring," she said, sliding the simple gold band onto his finger, "I promise to always be the one to hold your hand, broken or whole, through whatever life brings us." Their home, a cozy house built behind Yates's shop, quickly became known as one of the warmest and most welcoming in Abilene. Friends gathered there often, drawn by Madeline's hospitality and Yates's quiet humor. Even Doc Marshall became a regular visitor, often staying late into the evening discussing medical cases with Madeline or playing chess with Yates. A year after their wedding, Madeline shared news that completed Yates's happiness. They were expecting a child. The prospect of fatherhood, of creating the family he'd never had, filled him with equal parts joy and trepidation. "What if I don't know how to be a good father?" he confessed to Madeline one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her stomach. "I never had one of my own to learn from." Madeline covered his hand with hers. "You'll learn, just as I'll learn to be a mother. We'll figure it out together." She kissed him softly. "Besides, I've seen how you are with the Johnson children when they come to the shop. You have a natural way with them." "That's different," Yates protested. "They go home at the end of the day." "And our child will be with us always," she acknowledged. "But that just means more time to get it right, more chances to show love and teach values." Her expression grew thoughtful. "You know what my father used to say? The most important thing a parent can do is not to be perfect, but to be present, to show up every day and try their best." "I can do that," Yates promised, drawing her closer. "I'll be here every day for both of you." Their daughter, Sarah Grace Hamilton, was born on a spring morning in 1874, with Doc Marshall attending and Elias pacing nervously in the parlor. When Yates first held her, this tiny perfect being with Madeline's eyes and his dark hair, he understood at last what it meant to be truly home. As Sarah grew, so did Yates's business and Madeline's medical practice. Doc Marshall retired as planned, turning over most of his patients to Madeline, who became known throughout the county for her skilled hands and compassionate care. Some of the older residents grumbled initially about being treated by a woman, but even the most stubborn eventually came to respect her abilities. When Sarah was 3, a second child joined their family, a son they named James Elias, after both their fathers. With 2 children to raise and thriving careers, life was busy but deeply satisfying. The days of drifting, of looking over his shoulder, of never belonging anywhere seemed like another lifetime to Yates. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Yates presented Madeline with a special gift, a handcrafted leather medical bag, tooled with intricate designs including tiny replicas of medicinal herbs, and in one corner, 2 hands clasped together. "It's beautiful," Madeline exclaimed, running her fingers over the detailed work. "The most exquisite bag I've ever seen." "Look inside," Yates urged, watching her face. She opened the bag to find a document nestled within the deed to a plot of land on the outskirts of town, large enough for a proper house and garden. "I thought it might be time for a bigger home," Yates explained. "Somewhere the children can run and play, where you can plant that herb garden you've been talking about." Madeline's eyes filled with tears of happiness. "It's perfect," she whispered, embracing him tightly. "Just perfect." That night, after the children were asleep and they sat together on their small porch watching the stars, Madeline took his hand, the one that had been broken all those years ago, and gently traced the faint scars that remained. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked. "If you hadn't injured your hand, if you hadn't come to Abilene?" "I try not to dwell on what might have been," Yates replied honestly. "But I do thank my lucky stars every day that whatever forces guide our lives brought me to your door." Madeline smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. I believe we were always meant to find each other, even if it took a broken hand to make it happen." Yates chuckled, turning to kiss her temple. "In that case, it was the most fortunate injury a man ever suffered." As the years passed, Abilene continued to grow and change. The wild cattle town gradually transformed into a more settled community as railroads expanded and the cattle trade moved further west. Yates and Madeline changed too, their hair gradually silvering, laugh lines deepening around their eyes, their love growing stronger and more comfortable with each passing season. Sarah followed in her mother's footsteps, traveling east to attend medical school, fulfilling the dream Madeline had once set aside. James took to leather work like his father, eventually partnering with Yates in the business that became Hamilton and Son Fine Leather Goods. On warm summer evenings, Yates and Madeline could often be found sitting on the porch of the house they'd built on that anniversary gift of land, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once romped. Sometimes they would hold hands, just as they had that first day in the doctor's office, when a broken cowboy met a healer with gentle hands and a brave heart. "No regrets?" Madeline would sometimes ask, a teasing light in her eyes that had remained unchanged by time. And Yates would always answer the same way, squeezing her hand gently with fingers that had long ago healed but never forgotten the touch that had saved them and him. "Not a single one. You were the one to hold my other hand when I needed it most, and you've been holding it ever since." In a town that had seen its share of fleeting visitors and temporary fortunes, theirs was a love that endured, as strong and resilient as the leather Yates worked with his once broken hands, as healing and constant as the care Madeline provided to generations of Abilene citizens. It was a love that had begun with a simple offer of help and grown into a legacy that would continue long after they were gone, a testament to the power of second chances, of courage in the face of uncertainty, and of two hearts finding home in each other's keeping.